By late 1944, U.S. forces in the Pacific had pushed close enough to strike the Japanese-held Philippines. The islands were crucial to Japan, serving as both a supply route for war materials and a vital link to oil reserves in the Dutch East Indies. During the summer, after lengthy debate, American commanders finalized their strategy and approved General Douglas MacArthur's plan to seize the island of Mindanao before advancing to Leyte. MacArthur understood that taking the Japanese-occupied islands would increase pressure to liberate the capital, Manila, and for him, the mission also carried personal weight, since he had vowed to return after retreating in 1942. Supporting air operations from Admiral William Halsey's Task Force 38 destroyed roughly 500 Japanese aircraft and revealed only light resistance around Mindanao. In early September, Halsey proposed moving up the Leyte invasion originally planned for December, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff agreed. The sudden acceleration, however, created logistical challenges. The invasion fleet would rely on the 7th Fleet's older battleships and light escort carriers, and the coming monsoon season would render land-based airfields unusable. MacArthur demanded that Halsey's Task Force 38 provide extra air cover. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, consented, but also instructed Halsey to take the offensive if an opening appeared. If an opportunity to destroy a major part of the enemy fleet is offered or can be created, such destruction becomes the primary task. Still a 31. MacArthur, who had blocked direct communication between the 3rd Fleet and his 7th Fleet, was unaware of this directive. Meanwhile, the Japanese were also formulating a defensive strategy centered on the Philippines. Their plan, called Show 1, or Victory 1, was ambitious but unrealistic. Japan's recent defeats had depleted its naval aviation power, especially in trained pilots, though its Yamato-class battleships and long-range destroyers still posed a serious threat. Yet the Japanese combined fleet was greatly outnumbered by the U.S. 3rd and 7th Fleets, which fielded 34 fleet and escort carriers. Planning was further complicated by ongoing rivalry between the Japanese Army and Navy, which led to disjointed coordination despite Show 1's dependence on Army-controlled air units. Though they expected an American strike on the Philippines, Japanese leaders also prepared for attacks elsewhere, such as Formosa, and stationed much of the combined fleet at Linga Roads, a secure anchorage about 2,500 kilometers from Leyte and 3,000 from Formosa. Because of severe fuel shortages, the fleet could not refuel after departing Brunei and would have to wait until the U.S. target was confirmed before sailing. This delay meant the Japanese would not reach the invasion zone in time to strike during the landings, though attacking the invasion fleet remained their primary goal. By October, Admiral Soemu Toyoda, commander of the combined fleet, was convinced Leyte would be the target. He divided his forces into 3 groups. The 1st Diversionary Force, under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, centered around the 2 Yamato-class battleships, would approach Leyte Gulf from the north through the San Bernardino Strait. The 2nd Force, led by Vice Admiral Kiyohide Shima and supported by Admiral Shoji Nishimura's older ships, would enter from the south. Finally, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's carrier group, renamed the Mobile Force Main Body, would act as a decoy. Short of aircraft and skilled pilots, these carriers aimed to lure Task Force 38 away from the invasion area. The intricate plan required perfect timing and coordination, something Japanese naval operations had consistently failed to achieve. By the time their ships arrived, most U.S. troops would already be ashore with secure supply lines. Many Japanese officers doubted the plan's success. As October approached, both sides focused their attention on Leyte. Yet the first major engagement erupted not at sea, but in the skies over Formosa. To prepare for the Leyte assault, Task Force 38 resumed widespread air raids beginning on October 12th, concentrating on Formosa. Over the course of the day, U.S. carriers launched about 1,370 sorties and destroyed more than 100 Japanese planes. Air Commander Shigeru Fukudome admitted, "Our fighters were nothing but so many eggs thrown at the stone wall of the indomitable enemy formation." Toll 164. Reluctant to commit more forces, Fukudome was nevertheless ordered to fight a decisive battle. The Japanese threw every available aircraft from the show operations into the fight, giving Fukudome roughly 860 operational planes, comparable in number to Task Force 38's 1,000 aircraft, but far inferior in experience. Only the 190 aircraft of Typhoon Force were well-trained. These pilots were expected to break through U.S. defenses and attack American ships, while large, mixed formations of less capable aircraft distracted enemy fighters and anti-aircraft gunners. Radar operator Mike Carney recalled the scene as waves of 75 to 100 enemy planes approached. The KP pilots began to report a great many different kinds of planes. In other words, this was not a homogeneous, well-integrated tactical outfit, but very much a heterogeneous air mob coming up there, composed of all kinds of damn things. Toll 166. In the ensuing aerial chaos, American pilots downed or drove off most of the attackers. Nevertheless, Japanese torpedoes struck and severely damaged the heavy cruisers USS Canberra and USS Houston. Despite these limited successes, Japan suffered devastating losses. Between October 10 and 17, the Japanese lost roughly 500 aircraft compared to just 89 American planes. At first, the Japanese mistakenly believe they have destroyed as many as 17 American ships. Confident of victory, Admiral Toyota orders Vice Admiral Shima's force to move in and finish off any survivors. The U.S., however, cleverly encourages this assumption, using the crippled cruisers as bait. Though Shima cautiously advances, he soon realizes the trap and withdraws. Almost immediately after the battle over Formosa, General MacArthur's amphibious invasion force sails for Leyte on October 17th. In response, Toyota activates Operation Show 1, planning to reach Leyte Gulf by October 24th. But delays quickly make it clear that the schedule is unrealistic. Kurita's fleet is late refueling at Brunei, submarines require 48 hours to prepare, and Admiral Ozawa must transfer pilots and load aircraft onto his carriers by crane because many airmen lack carrier landing experience. Kurita divides his fleet into two groups, intending to strike Leyte Gulf in a pincer attack while Shima's force sails south from Japan to enter through the Surigao Strait. Yet the plan inspires little confidence among Kurita's officers. The revised timetable means they must attack in daylight rather than at night, forfeiting the advantage of surprise and missing the chance to strike the invasion fleet before it lands. Seeking to restore morale, Kurita rallies his men. You must all remember that there are such things as miracles. What man can say that there is no chance for our fleet to turn the tide of war in a decisive battle? We shall have a chance to meet our enemies. We shall engage his task forces. I hope you will not carry your responsibilities lightly. I know you will act faithfully and well. Stela 115. Kurita then leads his ships toward Leyte through the Palawan Passage, a region well known for American submarine patrols in an effort to conserve fuel. His fleet, however, lacks proper anti-submarine gear and does not deploy destroyers as a protective screen. On October 23rd, 2 U.S. submarines strike hard, sinking 2 heavy cruisers, including Kurita's flagship, and badly damaging another. The Japanese soon achieve a small but costly success of their own. The remnants of Formosa's Second Air Fleet transferred to the Philippines to assist Kurita's advance. Though most of their planes are lost before reaching targets, one 550-pound bomb from a Japanese aircraft penetrates the flight deck of the carrier USS Princeton and detonates in the hangar. The explosion triggers secondary blasts, and as the light cruiser USS Birmingham and nearby vessels rush to help, the Princeton's torpedo magazine erupts, killing and injuring 650 sailors aboard the Birmingham and dooming the carrier. American crews scuttle the Princeton soon after. The Japanese strike owes much to luck and to the dispersed state of Task Force 38. Of its 4 task groups, 2 are already en route for rest leave. One patrols east of Luzon, and another guards the San Bernardino Strait. Halsey urgently recalls all units, but some are too distant to rejoin in time to affect the events of October 24th. As Kurita's force moves toward Leyte Gulf through the Sibuyan Sea, only Task Group 38.2, the weakest of Halsey's formations, with just 1 fleet carrier and 2 escort carriers, is in position to intercept. Admiral Gerald Bogan orders U.S. aviators to concentrate their strikes on the massive battleships Yamato and Musashi. In the opening waves, American Avengers, Helldivers, and Hellcats hammer Musashi with numerous bombs and at least 7 torpedoes, inflicting severe flooding. Despite the damage, Japanese damage control teams keep her afloat. Her crew later claimed to have downed 6 American aircraft with intense anti-aircraft fire, even firing their enormous 18.1-inch guns at planes. I felt the muzzle blast each time they fired. I could swear the wings were ready to fold every time these huge shock waves hit us. Some of the explosions were blue, some red, some were pink, and some were yellow. Toll 230. Badly crippled, Musashi attempts to retreat westward with 2 escorting ships, but American planes continue to strike relentlessly. By 7 p.m., she has been hit by at least 16 bombs and 11 torpedoes and finally sinks, taking 1,000 of her 2,400 crew with her. In all her service, Musashi never fires a single shell at an enemy ship. Kurita briefly orders his fleet to withdraw, but later decides to resume the advance toward Leyte Gulf. American pilots observe only the initial retreat and mistakenly assume the first diversionary force has been defeated. Overstated damage reports reinforce this illusion. However, by focusing their attacks on Musashi, the Americans leave the bulk of Kurita's force largely intact, aside from 1 heavy cruiser forced to withdraw. While U.S. aircraft strike in the Sibuyan Sea, another confrontation unfolds farther south. American reconnaissance spots Admiral Nishimura's 3rd Section heading toward Leyte Gulf that afternoon, giving the 7th Fleet time to prepare. Rear Admiral Jesse B. Oldendorf arranges an ambush inside the Surigao Strait, positioning 6 battleships, 8 cruisers, and roughly 24 destroyers and 40 torpedo boats in a layered formation. The opening American torpedo salvos sink 2 destroyers and the battleship Fuso before the fleets engage in what becomes the final battleship gunnery duel in naval history, one dominated by overwhelming U.S. firepower. I was receiving a terrific bombardment. There were so many near misses that the gyro compass was out. The ship was constantly trembling from the force of near misses, and the wireless was out. Toll 255. Torpedoes again proved decisive, finishing off the battleship Yamashiro. For a moment, it appears that Admiral Shima is coming to Nishimura's aid, but upon seeing the devastation, he turns back. U.S. ships give a half-hearted chase but soon abandon pursuit, fortunately for them, as events would show. At 4 p.m. on October 24th, Task Force 38 detects Admiral Ozawa's carrier group to the north. Admiral Halsey now faces a crucial choice: remain in position to guard the San Bernardino Strait against Kurita's still dangerous force, or move north to annihilate Ozawa's carriers. In theory, his available strength might allow him to do both, but U.S. doctrine discourages dividing forces to fight 2 major battles simultaneously. Halsey decides to take the entire task force north in pursuit of the carriers that had escaped destruction at the earlier Battle of the Philippine Sea. However, overloaded communications and a confusing command chain result in a disastrous misunderstanding. Admiral Thomas Kincaid of the 7th Fleet, whose surface warships are far to the south after Surigao Strait, believes Halsey's battleships are still guarding the San Bernardino Strait. He will not discover the truth until it's too late. By then, Kurita's fleet has slipped through the strait and is advancing south along the coast of Samar. At 6:47 a.m., his lookouts spot the lightly armored escort carriers of the 7th Fleet's Taffy 3. Both sides are taken by surprise. I ran to the bridge and looked out, and I saw what looked like toothpicks on the horizon, right across the horizon. Many, many ships. Toll 263. The Japanese are still in the process of shifting from night cruising to daytime anti-aircraft formation, which hampers their initial response. Even so, within 15 minutes they open fire. Believing he faces heavier American fleet carriers, Kurita orders an immediate, uncoordinated assault, hoping to destroy flight decks before aircraft can launch. It is the first time in history that a Japanese surface ship opens fire on U.S. carriers. Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, commanding Taffy 3, reacts swiftly. He orders his small carriers to head east to gain wind for launching planes and to increase distance from the enemy. Every available aircraft, armed or not, is sent into the air, while ships lay dense smoke screens. The humid air causes the smoke to linger close to the water, greatly improving concealment, and passing rain squalls offer further cover. Aircraft from the nearby Taffy 2 group rushed to join the fight. Even so, the Japanese pressed their attack, with Yamato's 18-inch guns firing from nearly 27 kilometers away. Though none score a direct hit, the near misses explode underwater with terrifying force. The captain of USS White Plains recalled, "The vessel was shaken and twisted violently, throwing personnel in some parts of the ship from their feet and much gear to the deck from normal horizontal storage." Toll 265. To aid gunnery accuracy, the Japanese had loaded their shells with colored dye, turning the sea into a chaotic canvas of red, green, and yellow splashes. As the barrage closes in, Sprague gives a desperate order. 3 destroyers are to charge the enemy head-on. The American destroyers are hopelessly outmatched, yet their desperate charge yields results. 1 torpedo slams into a Japanese cruiser, knocking it out of action. The remaining torpedoes miss, and the destroyers come under ferocious Japanese fire. Yamato's smaller caliber shells strike USS Johnson 3 times before the battered ship slips into a rain squall for cover. USS Hull is less fortunate, hit up to 23 times before sinking with most of her crew. As Kurita sends forward his own destroyers, Johnson emerges again, charging into the fight and forcing the Japanese to launch torpedoes from poor positions that all fail to connect. Now the full fury of Japanese guns focuses on Johnson, which is soon overwhelmed and sinks. Tadashi Okuno, serving aboard one of the Japanese destroyers, remembered the grim aftermath. Men were floating on the water's surface, or sinking beneath it, while half-naked crew members jammed themselves into lifeboats and rowed away, escaping. We were close enough to see their unkempt beards and the tattoos on their arms. One of our machine gunners impulsively pulled his trigger. He must have been overflowing with feelings of animosity towards the enemy. But it was checked by a loud voice from the bridge saying, "Don't shoot at escaping men. Stop shooting, stop." Toll 286. American airstrikes, torpedo runs, and relentless destroyer harassment throw off Japanese gunnery aimed at the retreating carriers. Even when armor-piercing shells hit, the escort carrier's thin plating often allows the shells to pass clean through without detonating. Still, the damage mounts. Yamato's massive guns indirectly hit USS Gambier Bay, crippling her and leaving her vulnerable to other Japanese ships. She eventually capsizes and sinks, but the Japanese losses are severe as well. Although U.S. aircraft launch their attacks hastily and with limited coordination, they still wreak havoc, sinking 3 Japanese cruisers and damaging several more. Combined with Kurita's continued belief that he faces a far larger American carrier force, this confusion leads to a controversial decision. Just as damage is beginning to mount against Taffy 3, Kurita abruptly calls off the pursuit and withdraws through the San Bernardino Strait. Yet Taffy 3's ordeal isn't over. Moments after Kurita retreats, waves of kamikazes descend upon the surviving carriers, one crashing into USS St. Lo and sinking her. This marks the first organized use of suicide attacks in the Philippines campaign. According to military aviation historian Christoph Bergs, kamikaze tactics weren't entirely new. As early as February 1942, during the action off Bougainville, Lieutenant Masayoshi Nakagawa had tried to steer his damaged aircraft into USS Lexington. Similar spontaneous acts occurred throughout the war, often by pilots who knew their crippled planes could never return to base. By October 1944, however, such actions had evolved into deliberate, organized strategy. Both the Imperial Army and Navy Air Services began formally adopting suicide missions. Several officers, Lieutenant Takashige Igusa, Lieutenant Koji Tanaka, Rear Admiral Masafumi Arima, and Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, are regarded as the fathers of the kamikaze. Arima himself died on October 15th, reportedly while attempting to crash into the carrier USS Franklin. Although initially hesitant, Onishi soon used Arima's example to authorize systematic kamikaze attacks throughout the Philippines. The reasoning was brutally pragmatic. Japan's air units in the Philippines were under extreme pressure, with little hope of survival. When Onishi visited frontline squadrons, he told them frankly that they would die soon regardless, so they might as well die striking a decisive blow. Kamikaze attacks thus became a grimly rational cost-benefit measure, promising far greater results than conventional air assaults. The first organized kamikaze attacks stunned the Allies during the Philippines campaign. Allied analysts estimated that these suicide strikes were up to 10 times more likely to score hits than normal air raids. In the early stages, kamikazes damaged or sank around 40 ships, including 7 carriers, among them USS St. Lo. October 1944 was only the beginning. Encouraged by the perceived success at Leyte Gulf, Japan dramatically expanded the kamikaze program. Special attack units were formed throughout the services, though not every suicide pilot formally belonged to one. Between late 1944 and 1945, Japan increased the number of suicide attacks by roughly 60%. During the Battle of Okinawa, from April to May 1945, more kamikaze sorties were launched than in all the months between October 1944 and March 1945 combined. Yet their success rate declined sharply. Despite more planes being sent, fewer reached their targets. The Allies had learned to adapt, improving radar coverage, fighter interception, and shipboard defenses. Kamikaze attacks, once terrifyingly effective, became increasingly desperate as Japan's position collapsed. One of the Allies' most effective countermeasures was the VT, or Variable Time Fuse, a name chosen deliberately for secrecy. Unlike standard timed fuses that detonated to create those familiar black bursts along a bomber's path, the VT fuse contained a miniature proximity sensor. By sending out a signal and detecting its reflection, it could sense when an aircraft was near and explode at the optimal moment. Between October 1944 and March 1945, Japanese aircraft that entered Allied anti-aircraft range had a 73% chance of scoring a hit or near miss on a ship. Between April and May 1945, this probability dropped to 43%, and later fell even further. These numbers clearly show how improved Allied anti-aircraft systems and fire control drastically reduced Japanese effectiveness. Early warning and fighter interception were equally, if not more, important. With radar detection, radio coordination, and a refined command network, the Allies could engage Japanese aircraft long before they reached gun range. Radar-equipped destroyer picket ships stationed far from the main task forces provided this crucial early detection. Once kamikaze attacks were spotted, interceptors were directed to meet them. Statistically, if a suicide plane was intercepted 10 miles from a target ship, it still had a 50% chance of hitting. Intercepted at 50 miles, that chance plummeted to just 2%. This is why only about 1/3 of all kamikaze aircraft ever made it near a task force. Early warning and fighter interception became the most effective countermeasure, while strengthened anti-aircraft fire served as a reliable last defense. Although aircraft carriers were seen as prime targets for kamikaze pilots, most hits were actually scored on smaller or auxiliary vessels, large landing ships, supply craft, and especially destroyer pickets. These radar-equipped pickets, positioned on the outskirts of the fleet, were often the first ships the attackers encountered and therefore bore the brunt of many assaults. Inexperienced Japanese pilots with little flight or target training frequently dove on the first ships they saw. By war's end, around 170 hits had been recorded on destroyers and auxiliary ships, compared to roughly 25 on carriers. Nearly 4,000 kamikaze pilots were sent on these missions in Japan's final desperate months. Collectively, they scored about 450 hits or near hits, sinking 66 Allied vessels and damaging several hundred more. Allied losses reached roughly 6,200 dead and 8,700 wounded. While kamikaze operations inflicted tactical damage, they ultimately failed to alter Japan's strategic fate. In hindsight, some historians argue that Admiral Kurita might have achieved Show One's objective had he pushed into Leyte Gulf to attack the American invasion fleet. The debate remains heated. Kurita later offered several explanations for his withdrawal: mental exhaustion, fear of renewed air attack, fuel shortages, and the belief that any ships left in the Gulf were empty transports. Rear Admiral Tomiji Koyanagi reflected that Kurita may have chosen to die fighting warships rather than expend his men attacking helpless targets. Under these circumstances, it was presumed that if our force did enter Leyte Gulf, we would find that the transports had already withdrawn, and any success we might achieve would be very minor at best. We were prepared to fight to the last man, but we wanted to die gloriously. We believed several enemy carrier groups surrounded us, and though our air forces had been inactive, if they could strike even one decisive blow, a final fleet engagement might still bring honor in defeat. Stilla 198. Kurita was also unaware that Admiral Ozawa's decoy force had successfully lured away Admiral Halsey's Task Force 38. Even if Kurita had entered the Gulf, stronger U.S. forces stood ready to counterattack. As Kurita retreated, Halsey turned north to strike Ozawa's decoy fleet off Cape Engano. Unaware that most Japanese carrier aircraft were already destroyed, the Americans still viewed these carriers as a major threat. At dawn on October 25th, Task Force 38 launched massive strikes against Ozawa's remaining force, 1 fleet carrier and 3 light carriers. With only 13 planes left for defense, Ozawa's situation was hopeless. Bill Davis, flying a Hellcat from USS Lexington, recalled his attack run. After my dive, I was perhaps 3 feet from the bridge windows and could see Japanese officers and sailors inside. There was an admiral in full dress whites, sword at his side. I was doing 530 miles an hour, and I only caught a glimpse, but that image is burned into my memory forever. Toll 272. In a devastatingly coordinated assault, U.S. planes struck Zuikaku, the last of the carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor, with armor-piercing bombs and 6 torpedoes. Listing heavily, her crew gathered on the flight deck as their captain delivered a final address. The ensign was lowered before the order to abandon ship was given, and moments later Zuikaku slipped beneath the waves. By afternoon, U.S. aircraft had sunk 3 of Ozawa's 4 carriers and a destroyer, leaving the last carrier crippled. Despite launching the largest carrier air assault of the war, 527 sorties, the results were less decisive than expected. Japanese maneuvering, intense anti-aircraft fire, and pilot fatigue all hampered U.S. accuracy. When urgent calls for aid reached Halsey from the 7th Fleet farther south, his battleships turned back too late. They failed to re-engage Kurita's force, though they did sink a straggling Japanese destroyer. The battle off Cape Engano thus marked the closing phase of the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval engagement in human history. Its immense scale and simultaneous land campaigns on Leyte have made it one of the most complex and debated operations in all of World War II. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, fought from October 23 to 26, 1944, spanned hundreds of miles across the Philippine seas, so casualty counts vary depending on where one marks its beginning and end. U.S. naval losses are often listed as 473 killed, 1,110 missing, and 1,220 wounded. These figures exclude the additional 1,750 American prisoners of war who died when the Japanese transport Arasan Maru was sunk by a U.S. submarine on October 24. Japanese losses were far heavier, totaling around 13,000 dead. Of the roughly 300 U.S. vessels that participated, 11 were lost. Japan lost 28 of the 69 ships assigned to Operation Show 1. At first glance, Leyte Gulf was a resounding U.S. victory, but many historians have since debated whether even greater success might have been possible with fewer losses. Much of that discussion centers on Admiral William Bull Halsey. His critics accuse him of recklessly chasing the Japanese decoy force north and leaving the San Bernardino Strait unguarded, thereby granting the enemy its only real chance for success. Some of his intelligence staff even advised against this move. Though admired by the public, Halsey often clashed with fellow officers and superiors, and he may have sought one last decisive triumph to bolster his standing against peers like Admirals Raymond Spruance and Mark Mitcher. His defenders, however, argue it is unfair to judge Halsey with the benefit of hindsight. At the time, Admiral Chester Nimitz had instructed him to prioritize attacks on enemy carriers should they appear. Moreover, U.S. intelligence on Japanese strength and movement was poor, and communication failures were common, believing Admiral Kurita's force was crippled beyond threat. Halsey later wrote, "As it seemed childish to me to guard statically the San Bernardino Strait, I concentrated Task Force 38 during the night and steamed north to attack the Japanese carriers at dawn. I believed that Kurita's force had been so heavily damaged in the Shibuyan Sea that it could no longer be considered a serious menace to 7th Fleet." Toll 12. The U.S. Navy also suffered from an unwieldy command system split between separate commands and personalities like MacArthur, Nimitz, and Halsey, leading to slow coordination and mixed priorities. Despite these challenges, the Battle of Leyte Gulf was undeniably a decisive American victory. Even Japanese commanders, such as Admiral Ugaki, admitted defeat. The enemy cleaned up the sea thoroughly, leaving nothing, with the feeling of a victor disposing of the remnants of the defeated enemy. We also had times like that some time ago. Evans 3:20. The loss did not surprise most Japanese officers. Confidence in Operation Show 1 had been low from the start, and many historians now agree that the plan was doomed regardless of execution. Some commanders reframed the operation as a chance to die with honor rather than win a battle. Please give the combined fleet the chance to bloom as flowers of death. This is the Navy's earnest request. Still a 61. Yet even that goal proved impossible. The Japanese fleets had sailed too late to strike the U.S. invasion convoys during their vulnerable landing phase. At best, they could have destroyed empty transports or outdated escorts, meager compensation for the loss of the Imperial Navy's remaining strength. The dream of a decisive fleet engagement, rooted in pre-war doctrine, ignored the vast imbalance in power, especially in naval aviation. Even if Kurita had pushed into Leyte Gulf after his fight with Taffy III, he lacked the means to affect the land battle that Operation Show 1 was meant to influence. Still, defeat at sea did not instantly secure victory on land. As the naval fighting ended, General MacArthur's ground forces continued their brutal campaign to liberate the Philippines, a long, costly operation that would stretch well into 1945. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the Allies closed in on Nazi Germany. By early 1945, American, British, and French troops stood ready to cross the Rhine River while Soviet armies massed along the Oder, preparing to strike at Berlin itself. To explore these final chapters of the war, Real Time History has produced extensive documentaries covering the battles of the Rhine and Berlin. 16 Days in Berlin is a comprehensive 2-hour, 18-part series chronicling the fight for the city day by day, complete with detailed maps, animations, and expert analysis. For those interested in the last major Western Front campaign, Rhineland 45 is a 5-part, 3-hour exploration of the fierce battles leading to the Rhine crossings. Due to the uncompromising realism and archival combat footage, these series are available exclusively on Nebula, a creator-owned streaming platform free from advertising restrictions and algorithms. You can watch in full 4K on any device, browser, smartphone, smart TV, or streaming box by visiting nebula.tv Real-Time History. There you'll find 16 Days in Berlin, Rhineland 45, Red Atoms, and many more documentaries from independent historians. Nebula now also offers a lifetime membership, granting permanent access to all current and future content while directly supporting creators like Real-Time History. 1/3 of your membership goes straight to funding new productions. Special. Thanks go to Christoph Bergs for his assistance with this episode. To learn more about the Pacific War, check out our documentaries on the battles of Saipan and Peleliu. If you're watching this through Patreon or Nebula, thank you for your support. It makes this work possible. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this has been a production of Real Time History, the history channel that doesn't believe in miracles.